everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to do a non-spoiler dual review for Circe by Madeline Miller and The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. I wanted to compare these two books because Circe is of course a booktube's darling, a lot of people absolutely love this book, and The Witch's Heart is a new release that is often being compared with Circe. Now I read both of these books in February and I can definitely see the similarities. Both are adult fantasy standalones that are greatly influenced by mythology, and both follow a female protagonist that plays a very small role in the original tales, but their characters and their plot is greatly expanded in these books. But I also saw some important differences. So I wanted to point those out for you in this review, so that if you loved Circe, you can decide whether or not you want to pick up The Witch's Heart. But more importantly, maybe you didn't like Circe that much, like me. And then the differences that are between Circe and The Witch's Heart can really make you love The Witch's Heart like I did. If you haven't read any of these books, then don't worry, I will do a full review of both of these, so then you can still decide if you want to pick up both, one or none of them. But without further ado, I am going to jump into the premise and I'm going to keep it short before we get into some more interesting parts. So in Circe, we follow Circe. She is the daughter of the sun god Helios and lower water nymph, so this is definitely based on Greek mythology. When Circe is born, it's quite clear that she doesn't really have any divine qualities, and therefore she is neglected by her parents and treated quite harshly by the other gods. This is why she is very fascinated by mortals and wants to get close to them. And this in turn leads her to use witchcraft, which is a forbidden power. Zeus then banishes her to a deserted island, and Circe lives there and gets visitors, both mortals as immortals, and we follow her journey there. On the other hand, Angrboda, from The Witch's Heart, we follow a little bit later in life, while she is fleeing from Odin, because Odin wants her to tell him his future and she refuses. While she is fleeing, she comes across a cave at the end of the world and she decides to live there. She meets Loki, the trickster god, a romance ensues and children follow. So it's quite clear from the premise alone that there are quite some similarities between these two stories. You follow a strong female character who is mistreated by the gods and goes and live quite secluded, while receiving visitors. But there are definitely some important differences as well. In Circe, I had the feeling that I was reading some short stories one after another, because you meet these visitors, but they don't really stay. So you have almost a short story of Circe interacting with these visitors who often want something out of it from her, and then they leave. Then you have a short intersection almost where Circe lives alone and she contemplates her past encounters with mortals or immortals, and that's definitely very important for Circe's journey. But then when she meets somebody else, it's again a different character. So that does have some consequences as well for the characterization of these side characters, but I will get into that in a little while. But that's definitely a big difference, that you don't really have an overarching plot that much, because the characters do switch a lot, and you do have some that come back once in a while, but most of them you only see for a short period of time, and they have a very clear set story that doesn't continue throughout the entire book. With The Witch's Heart, on the other hand, you have a much clearer plot because the characters that you meet in the beginning return. Yes, it's true that, for instance, Loki, but also Skadi, a friend of Angrboda, come to the cave, they visit her and they leave, but they do return, and you don't have this switching of different characters, and you have a much more important overarching plot. I felt that with Circe, you are really following her journey, and not really the journey, or not really an impact on the rest of the world, while what Angrboda is doing does have an impact on the entire world, and it's much more bigger in scope. What also means that the ending is quite different between these two. Circe is almost like a dying flame, and the ending is quite enjoyable. It definitely has a message behind it, and I also think that for Circe, the themes that are being discussed are much more important than the actual plot. But with The Witch's Heart, you really have a big finale in the ending that's much more wide in scope than just Angrboda and her little cave. So that's definitely a difference between the two, and for me personally, that was a problem that I had with Circe, because I don't really enjoy short stories. I love interactions between characters and really deepening that out a little bit. So that's why I enjoyed The Witch's Heart in this part a little bit more. It's definitely more plot focused than Circe. So when I am talking about themes, I mean that with Circe, feminism and the place of women in the world and finding one's own place is very much to the forefront, and I think that that's actually the focus that the writer also wanted to have. So for example, I do have a small quote from the book, and that is, "It is a common saying that women are delicate creatures, flowers, eggs, anything that may be crushed in a moment's carelessness. If I had ever believed it, I no longer did." So quotes like this are quite prevalent in the book of Circe, and that can make you really think about it. So if you like to have heavy themes inside a book and think about certain quotes and reread them, then I think that that's more present in Circe than in The Witch's Heart. The same themes are present there. You have motherhood, being a single mother, what's the difference in a relationship between men and females, and what are some of the advantages that the one has over the other, but it's not in the forefront like it is in Circe. So that's definitely a difference between the two, and it's up to you to decide what you like more. When we then go over to some of the technical choices that the authors made, Circe is told in first person past tense, of course from the perspective of Circe. So that again means that yes, you will be more engrossed in Circe, or at least that's what the writer was trying to do, but you don't really know a lot about the side characters or what they are thinking. That's of course always going to be a limitation of first person, but when it is done well and when you are really in the mind of that character that you are following, you have a lot of positives as well. And if there's one thing that I hate in first person, it's when the narrator isn't consistent. It was one of the big negatives that I had for Red Rising, but that's definitely not the case here. I feel that everything is set pretty consistent, so that's definitely done very well. However, I didn't really feel connected with Circe as I wanted to be and as I often am with first person. And of course, as I said before, those side characters, one, you don't see a lot of them. They're only present a short period in the book, and then that first person makes them even less prevalent in the book and less understandable. So there is definitely the limitation that I maybe felt a little bit more here than in most books in first person that I read. On the other hand, The Witch's Heart is told in third person past tense, and most of it is from the perspective of Angerboda. However, you sometimes can understand what the other persons are feeling. So it's not purely limited, but for the most part it is, and we do follow Angerboda the whole time. So if Loki or Skadi are somewhere else, you will not see that. You stay with Angerboda, and then you do get to know about some events when she hears from somebody else or due to her magical abilities, but you're never present. So I did really feel very connected to Angerboda, even though it was third person, just because you stay with her and you definitely see what she is feeling the whole time, while with the other characters you only see snippets of it, but the snippets does mean that I was more connected to the side characters as well. So I think that the use of past tense was done very well here. If we then look at writing style and prose, Circe is definitely a more whimsical read, and I do think that that fits Greek mythology a lot, because a lot of the old tales are very whimsical and with the legend and heroes of old. So I do think that that fits here, and it's done very well. So if you like those fairy tale-esque retellings that also have a very whimsical feel, then I do think that Circe will be a very pleasant read. This, while The Witch's Heart is a little bit more direct and it's more middle of the road. There isn't anything overly whimsical, there isn't anything overly dark. It's just pleasant the way it is, and it's definitely good writing. I would almost compare it to Robin Hobb, where there isn't anything very special about it or something very specific that you can point your finger on, other than that it's just enjoyable and fun to read. And there is definitely also a little bit of humor in The Witch's Heart with Loki and the trickster god, and I think that the way that it's told, which is more direct, is again very fitting for Norse mythology. So if you like that whimsical read, then that's definitely a point that I would give to Circe. And I also have a little quote that I have for this, and that's again, with a whimsical read, there is just sometimes quotes that you read with metaphors that are just good and fitting. And with a more direct read, everything is good, but nothing really jumps out. So again, that's something for you to decide what you like most. So many years I had spent as a child, sifting his bright features for his thoughts, trying to glimpse among them one that bore my name. But he was a harp with only one string, and the note it played was himself. "You've always been the worst of my children," he said. "Be sure to not dishonor me. I have a better idea. I will do as I please, and when you count your children, leave me out. So that's what I mean with metaphors, that it's definitely more present in Circe. The whimsical reads, I know that some people like it, others don't. It's a preference. I like both writing styles, and as long as it's not very bad writing, I don't really care how it is given to the reader. When we then go over the pacing of the book, I did have some problems with the pacing of Circe. It's definitely very slow, and especially the interludes where she is alone. And that's, of course, also because I couldn't really connect with her as a character, but those felt pretty long and could have been shortened for me, or something should have happened there. While with The Witch's Heart, I didn't have any pacing problems, and I also enjoyed that there aren't any chapters. You actually have 3 parts, but the last part is all the way at the end. But other than that, you don't have chapters, and that really gave it the flow of one continuous story that I greatly enjoyed. When we then go over to magic system, fantastical elements, and world building, of course these books are heavily influenced by the mythological tales that they are based upon. So in both we follow witches, but I feel that in Circe the concoction of potions is much more important, because this is what drives the plot forward. This is why she is punished by the gods. On the other hand, Angrboda also makes potions, but this is not really important for the plot and is more on the side. Angrboda's real power is sight, I think that's how you pronounce it, and that is that she can look into the future. And this has a much greater impact on the plot and the world as a whole than Circe's power. But both of their powers get them in trouble, and this is quite in the beginning of the story already. Now, I really liked Sight because there are definitely some limitations. It's a little bit better explained. It's definitely a soft magic system for both of them, but it was a little bit harder in The Witch's Heart because Sight definitely has limitations, and it is also explained how it is used. And there is some connection with Norse mythology and the afterlife and stuff like that, so I did greatly enjoy that. In terms of fantastical elements, of course, mythology, you are going to have mythological creatures. First of all, you have the gods, and I think that these are a little bit more present in Circe, because you do see her growing up as a child. She lives with these gods, she lives at a quite secluded place that is part of this world, but almost in parallel. So also in terms of world building, that's definitely there. And you have Circe meeting the gods, but also meeting mortals, which definitely shows the difference between the two. While with Angrboda, you only ever see Loki, but everybody that she does meet is not really a mortal or normal human. They are giants, they are gods, or something like that. But the presence of the gods is very limited, where you don't really meet a lot of gods. As I said, you almost only meet Loki, and he doesn't really feel as a god. So in terms of that, if you like godlike beings in your books, then I think that that's more present in Circe. When we then look at some special animals almost, of course in Circe you have a lot of the favorites of Greek mythology. I don't know a lot about Greek mythology, but even I could recognize the Minotaur, for example. So I think if you like those classical tales, that's definitely something that you will see here. Also heroes of the War of Troy and stuff like that. That's definitely present there. With Angrboda, you also have these special beings in terms of her children that are definitely something else, but I won't go too deep into that. Of course, if you know the classical tales, you know what I'm talking about. And I actually quite like that they were more animal form, and that, again, they are closer to the main character than, for instance, the Minotaur is to Circe. So that's something that I greatly enjoyed, but in both, I really liked the fantastical elements a lot. For world building, of course, both of them live a big majority of the story in this quite secluded place. The deserted island one, and then the cave in the other. But there is definitely some traveling going on, especially for Circe, who first lives with the gods, then gets abandoned on this deserted island. There's also some traveling on sea. So there is more different spaces that you will see in Circe than in The Witch's Heart, where the majority is really in this cave and in the near vicinity. But there is also some afterlife that you see more towards the end. And then it really expands on a bigger scale than what happens with Circe. I do think that world building for both of them is good, but it's quite minimal because, of course, they take a lot of influence from stories that we already know. Talking about the characters, of course, we have our main characters, but I think that I already said a lot about them. I think that Angrboda is a little bit more relatable. Both of them are very strong female characters, but Circe, while I feel like Circe is a character study of this main character, felt a little bit unrelatable to me. I can see that Madeline Miller tried to make her a little bit more human, but all in all, the mistakes that she made were almost mistakes that you would applaud. Yes, she is worse for it in the end, but it was the right thing to do. While when Angrboda makes a mistake, it's the wrong thing to do, but you can understand why she does it. So I enjoyed that a little bit more, but I can see that the character study of Circe and Circe trying to find her own place can be very enjoyable for some other people, especially again if you want to discuss those themes a little bit more that are definitely in the forefront of Circe and that can really make you think about them, discuss them with other people maybe, and that can be something that you greatly enjoy, while that isn't really present that much in The Witch's Heart, but there the main character was definitely more to my liking. I felt more connected to her. With The Witch's Heart I cried, with Circe I didn't really cry, so that's definitely a difference there. In The Witch's Heart I also think that the secondary characters are more developed. Of course you have Loki and Skadi as I said before, and I really like the interaction of Angrboda with both of them, but they also had an interaction with each other that I greatly enjoyed. They had a troubled past, again both of them, making them more dimensional characters and not just a cardboard that is there for the main character to bounce ideas off. And I did feel a little bit like that with Circe. There are definitely some secondary characters, especially towards the end, that I actually did enjoy and that were a little bit more fleshed out, but in the end it all really stayed surface level. And so I do think that for the secondary characters and the main character, if you like characterization a lot, then I do think that The Witch's Heart is a little bit stronger here. While Circe, it almost feels like a book that is more meant to be an atmospherical read, to be a thematic read, than anything for the plot and for the characters. And I would almost compare this to the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, even though that there, plot-wise, especially the second and the third book, more happens, but if you compare it to the first book, I think you can definitely see some connections to the vibe that it's giving. So to sum up, I think you will greatly enjoy Circe if you are a fan of Greek mythology, because you definitely have some very prominent figures. You have the Minotaur, but you also have Icarus, you have some heroes from the War of Troy that you will see. So if that's something that you like, definitely pick up Circe. I also think that you have more godlike beings that are being present in the story, and that the whimsical writing style, the fairy tale-esque feel that you get, and the atmosphere is very well done in Circe. However, I do think it lacks a little bit in overarching plot as well as in the characterization, or at least the connection that I had with the characters. On the other hand, I think that The Witch's Heart is much stronger in overarching plot, is much stronger in the characters and in their development, but it doesn't really have a very strong theme, and it doesn't really read as a whimsical read. I think that the story in itself is much more important than the feeling that you get with it. So it depends what you like from both of them. And I think if you didn't really like Circe for some of the things that I mentioned, that you should definitely pick up The Witch's Heart. However, if some of those things were your favorite parts of the story, then you might not necessarily love The Witch's Heart, but I think that you can still like it, because we do like a big array of books and it's not just one part that we enjoy. So all in all, let me know if I have helped you. Maybe you've already read one or even both of them, and if that's the case, then let me know if you think I've done a good job, or if I forgot some things to mention that are quite important, then I can add them in the description or pin your message. And if you haven't read any of these, then please let me know if now you are a little bit curious, or if you've decided that it's not for you. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!